This is NBC News Digest, sponsored by Polaroid. Here is Edwin Newman.
Good evening. Yasser Arafat says that war against the Zionist American enemy is the only way to change the balance of power in the Middle East. That report comes from the news agency of Arafat's Palestine Liberation Organization. Negotiators for Israel and Lebanon have agreed on the wording of the plan to pull Israeli troops out of Lebanon. They expect to sign the agreement on Tuesday. More news after this.
Introducing two of the most impressive developments in the history of Polaroid sun photography. Our new Sun 600 light mixer and the price.
The number of people killed in all types of transportation accidents has dropped to its lowest point in 20 years, according to the National Transportation Safety Board. Deaths on the highway showed the greatest decline, down 11%, maybe because the recession cut down driving. I'm Edwin Newman, NBC News, New York.
This is NBC News Digest. Here is Edwin Newman.
Good evening. United States negotiator Paul Nitze is back in Geneva for Tuesday's resumption of the talks on limiting nuclear missiles in Europe. The talks have been in recess for 6 weeks. Nitze says United States proposals offer an opportunity for progress. The Soviet negotiator says the same thing about his plan. Chairman Robert Dole of the Senate Finance Committee said today that the budget process was not a spectator sport. Dole urged President Reagan to get involved and help the 1984 budget through Congress. The Bishop of San Salvador says that 364 people were killed in El Salvador last week. He blames the army, leftist rebels, and rightist death squads. I'm Edwin Newman, NBC News, New York.
This is NBC News Digest. Here is Jennifer McLogan, NBC News.
Good evening. There is no change in the siege at the Libyan embassy in London. It remains a standoff. What's being called an unusually strong spring storm dumped up to 3 feet of wet snow on the central Rockies and western plains today. 3,000 travelers were stranded at the Denver airport. A bus packed with Boy Scouts crashed on a highway in Utah today, killing 2 teenagers and injuring more than 40 other people. Police suspect the driver fell asleep. President Reagan, in a paid political broadcast today, denounced critics who say he favors the rich. He said that is political demagoguery, quote, dutifully reported by a goodly portion of the press. I'm Jennifer McLogan in New York. More news later on this NBC station.
This is NBC News Digest, sponsored by Bud Light. Here is Norma Quarles, NBC News.
Good evening. A massive storm moving east from the Rockies sent tornadoes spinning through Alabama today. No injuries reported. Last night, tornadoes cut through 10 northern Mississippi counties. 12 people were killed and more than 100 injured. Easter services were held amid the rubble. Now this.
Don't just ask for a light beer.
Hey, give me a light.
Ask them to bring out their best.
No, Bud Light.
Bud Light. Because everything else is just a light.
The Supreme Court tomorrow will hear arguments over the legality of a law requiring any draft-age young man applying for federal student aid to sign a statement saying he has registered. Demonstrators at a U.S. military base in West Germany cut through barbed wire and entered the base. A U.S. guard fired 3 shots in the air. German police arrested 4 people. I'm Norma Quarles in New York. More news later on this NBC station.
This is NBC News Digest, sponsored by Budweiser. Here is Ann Garrels, NBC News.
Good evening. In the Netherlands, Pope John Paul II was greeted with the most violent demonstrations of his papacy. Scores of rioters screaming, "Kill the Pope," pelted police with rocks and bottles. During Secretary of State Schultz's trip to Jerusalem, 3 bombs exploded. A 4th was defused today. PLO factions claimed responsibility. And in a new round of violence, Hindus and Muslims clashed in western India. In northern India, the death toll topped 85 as a result of bombings police blame on Sikh terrorists. Now this.
It's pick-a-pair time. Time to stock up on 6-packs, 12-packs, or even cases of Budweiser and Bud Light.
Pick-a-pair, Bud Light. The New York Knicks are jumping for joy. They won first pick in the draft of college players. Their choice, Georgetown center Patrick Ewing. I'm Ann Garrels in Washington. More news later on this NBC station.
This is NBC News Digest. Here is Chuck Scarborough, NBC News.
Good evening. President Reagan is pushing Congress to approve $14 million in aid to the Nicaraguan rebels. In a Washington speech tonight, the president termed the funding a matter of survival.
We've asked the Congress of the United States to release $14 million for food, medicine, and other support to help the patriots who believe in democracy survive in the hills of Nicaragua.
American and West German officials are re-examining the schedule for President Reagan's state visit after criticism of his plan to lay a wreath at a German military cemetery. His itinerary may now include a visit to a concentration camp or a monument to Nazi victims. Chrysler Corporation announced today it would form a joint company with its Japanese partner, Mitsubishi Motors, to build small cars in the Midwest by 1988. Some 200 rioting convicts have released the warden and 21 other hostages at an Alabama state prison 12 hours after their takeover. Artificial heart patient Jack Burcham underwent emergency surgery today that stopped the bleeding in his chest. Health officials today said that up to 1 million Americans may already be infected with the AIDS virus, and a nationwide immunization may be necessary once a vaccine is developed. A spacewalk tomorrow will set up a Wednesday attempt to repair a crippled satellite. A device on the space shuttle's mechanical arm will try to snag the satellite power switch. Defending champ Jeff Smith of Great Britain won today's Boston Marathon despite severe leg cramps. Lisa Larson-Wiedenbach of Massachusetts won the women's division. And midnight is the deadline for filing your federal income tax return. IRS officials said computer foul-ups have slowed tax refunds, but all should be in the mail by May 30th, after which you get refund interest. I'm Chuck Scarborough in New York. More news later on this NBC station.